Ahora, después de este buen comienzo, damos inicio entonces a nuestra agenda académica con la conferencia El liderazgo y la educación jesuita como herramientas de responsabilidad social, a cargo de Chris Lowney, de Estados Unidos. Lowney es un reconocido conferencista sobre liderazgo y ética de los negocios. Ha realizado seminarios en Estados Unidos, Perú, Filipinas, México, Venezuela, Indonesia, Brasil, Colombia y España, entre otros. Lowney fue un seminarista jesuita durante 7 años. Es el autor del exitoso libro El liderazgo al estilo de los jesuitas. En la actualidad vive en Nueva York, donde es presidente de la junta directiva de uno de los sistemas de salud más importantes de los Estados Unidos. Su primer libro, Liderazgo Heroico, Mejores Prácticas de una empresa de 450 años que cambió el mundo, fue el mejor vendido en el ranking de la CBPA. Recibamos con un fuerte aplauso a Chris Lowney.
Thank you for this kind introduction and the privilege to come here today. And I want to invite us to a much bigger imagination of what is our Jesuit network and how we can take the first steps to activating a much bigger network, and not to worry about mistakes, because we will make many mistakes. I am supposed to talk about leadership, Jesuit education, social responsibility, but this topic is very complicated. So I hope you don't mind if instead I will tell 3 stories. Father General has 4, only I have 3. The first story will be about the potential of our network. The second story will be about the ultimate purpose of our network, why we exist. And the third story will be how do we put our network into action. But even though I'm supposed to talk about leadership and social responsibility, I will begin with my first story about navigating ships. Everybody knows how to navigate. We put an address in Google Maps, and then in our automobile, some voice says, in 500 meters, turn right. But believe it or not, Christopher Columbus did not have Google Maps. In fact, he had a very primitive map, something like that. And in his era, the sailors could tell their latitude. They knew how far north or south they were in the world. But they could not imagine their latitude, how far east or west in the world. Some of you have been on a boat where you can no longer see the shore. And imagine how terrifying and frightening to be on a boat where you have no radio, cannot communicate, and do not know exactly where you are. And terrible tragedies happened. One time in England, a large fleet of ships, after a very long voyage around the world, were coming home, and very close to their home port, a storm came. And suddenly they could not see. And they crashed into rocks right in the English Channel. And 1,000 British sailors died, just hours before they would see their families. And we know that many Jesuits also died at sea. They were traveling in tiny ships, about as large as one train car on the metro here in Medellin. And sometimes, in terrible storms, these ships were destroyed and people drowned. And sometimes they were invaded by pirates. In 1570, a ship of Jesuits going to Brazil was invaded by pirates who killed 40 Jesuits, hacking them with swords and throwing them into the water. Some of them still alive, to drown. Some Jesuits became shipwrecked because they did not know where they were. 3 Jesuits were stranded on a desert island one time and starved to death there. Still, despite these dangers and difficulties, these brave men kept coming. West to South America, south to Africa, east to Asia, and we know very well the names of some of these men who finally arrived. Here is Father Ricci, who became famous for enculturating himself so closely into Chinese culture. And here, of course, is Father Javier. I guess many people attended a school which is Javier. Yeah? This is a very old-fashioned prayer card, and we see the local indigenous people depicted in a very patronizing way. And so we also understand that there were terrible aspects of colonialism. But we can understand these terrible aspects, but at the same time admire these men who were so much more enlightened than their own era. Here are 2 more that we know very well. Here is Father Anchieta. This is a statue of him in Brazil, in Santos, I think. And here is someone very close to us here. Here is Father Claver, a statue of him in Cartagena. Yeah, exactly. Now, let me check first. For those who are listening in English, the speed is okay. If it's too fast, please raise your hand. It's okay. And for those listening in translation, the speed is okay? Okay, good. We know some of these famous Jesuits, but many of them, the ones who could not complete their journey, the ones who drowned, the ones who were killed, we do not know their names. They're invisible to us. But somehow I imagine that those unknown men, they are looking down on us today, and they are considering the sacrifice of their own lives to have been worthwhile because of what you have become in your lives. They were the ones who were trying to begin the parishes and ministries that became the schools that we all attended. And they're very happy with what these schools have become. We should be grateful to them, the ones whose names we don't know. And maybe we could also make a kind of pledge that somehow we will honor them by completing their mission, by doing some of the good work that they never had the chance to do. Let me return to my story about navigation, because it will help us imagine how we could complete their mission. So the inability to calculate longitude was a terrible problem for decades and decades. And many scientists tried to imagine how to fix this problem. And one Jesuit had a brilliant idea for helping the world to calculate longitude. This is Father Athanasius Kircher. And he was called the last man who knew everything. He was interested in everything, 17th century. Here is his depiction of the Tower of Babel. It was the first skyscraper. And here was a little box, a system he created to translate every language in the world into every other language. This was Google Translate. And this was his little machine that could project images onto a wall using candlelight. This was Netflix. Father Kircher also knew that the point of a needle on a compass, there's an angle between exactly north and the way your needle points, and this distance, it gets larger in different parts of the world. And so he had a brilliant idea. He knew that his Jesuit colleagues were in Uruguay and Argentina and Ethiopia and Filipinas. And he thought, if each one of them can measure this angle and can send me the measurement, I can prepare a simple chart. And any sailor in the ocean can look at his compass and look at his own angle and check this chart and know what is his longitude. It was a brilliant idea. It did not work because 17th century compasses were not accurate enough to prepare the chart correctly. But Father Kircher did something that nobody else in the world at that time could have done. Because no one else had this incredible network of knowledgeable people around the world, like the Jesuits had. And even though, in a worldly way, these men failed, what incredible leadership they showed. Let's think about some of their leadership qualities. First of all, they used their gifts to serve others. Second, they were so innovative. Let's try to do something different. Let's think about the problem a different way. And third, they were very humble. Because if they had succeeded, who would be the hero? The hero would be a chart of numbers with nobody's named. They were not working for their own personal glory. They were working for God's glory. And finally, these men were deeply networked. They were connected to each other all over the world. Well, today Jesuits are still distributed all over the world in 100 countries or more, but there are not so many Jesuits as there were. Now there are 17,000, and in most countries this number is going down, But what if we started to think about this network in a completely different way? No longer Jesuits in one network, alumni of my school in another network, Wuja in some other network. But instead, what if we imagined that all of us are part of one large Jesuit-inspired, Ignatius-inspired, Amari Servir-inspired network? Surely, there is no network on earth that has the depth and diversity and talent of our network. Just think, we are spiritual directors, bankers, lawyers, accountants, mothers and fathers, factory workers, chief executives, the richest people in the world, the poorest people in the world, refugees, people with incredible family and business connections, people with no connections. We are priests, we are bishops, we are even now a pope. So, what if we imagined how many of us are in this global Jesuit network? Here is the answer. No one knows. No one has even tried to count or imagine. But for sure, it is millions. It's millions. Just think of all of the graduates of Jesuit colegios and universities. Think of the faculties. Think of our students. Think of those who worship in Jesuit parishes, who go to Fe y Alegría schools, who are helped by Jesuit refugee service, who are inspired by the spiritual exercises. All of us part of one network. Now, by no means do I minimize the importance of the Jesuits themselves in our network. I wish there were more Jesuits. And I hope tonight you will please join me in praying to God for more vocations to the Jesuits and to religious life. I do not know why there are more Jesuits. You must ask the Holy Spirit. But this is what I do know. At this moment in history, we are the ones who are in this room. And some of us are Jesuits, and some of us are not Jesuits, and some of us are Catholics, and some of us are not Catholics. Nonetheless, we are the ones who are here. And therefore, we are the ones who can imagine that somehow we are called to follow this incredible legacy of what this network has contributed. My first story about Kirke reminded us that we have an incredible potential network. My second story is to remind us what is the purpose, what is the objective of our network. And it is not about a Jesuit, but it is about a boy in the 1970s who attended a Jesuit high school in New York City. 100 of us graduated from Regis High School, and we are deeply grateful to everything that the Jesuits did for us. At that time, even more lay partners and lay colleagues than Jesuits, what they did for us. One summer, while I was at this high school, the rector invited us to volunteer for 2 or 3 days to clean up some old offices and unused desks of the school. And so one afternoon, I was cleaning desks, and I found an old magazine which was celebrating the 50th anniversary of my high school. And so I opened it, and I saw these kind of photos. And these kind of photos reminded me that an old world had passed away, and I was somehow part of a new world and a different world. And then I sat down and I started to read some of the words in this magazine, not just the photos. And there was a sermon in this magazine for the 50th anniversary of our school. And the priest who gave the sermon used the image of the owl, the bird, the owl, which is the symbol, of course, of wisdom and the mascot of our school. And in his sermon, he imagined all of us graduates of that school standing in the courtyard, and the owl, the wise owl, looking at us. And I will read you some of the words, but I would like to say, don't imagine people from my high school, but all of us. Every graduate of every school now alive, maybe 3 million of us, standing and listening to these words from the owl. What would impress the owl if we all gathered under his wing in the courtyard? Our degrees, our tax brackets, our credit cards, our club memberships? Surely he would blink many times as he beholds this vast panoply of material success. But as a curious owl, isn't he entitled to ask us, how are you using the gifts God gave you? You used most of them well here at Regis High School. Do you still remember where you are going? Are people any better because of your pilgrimage through life? Is the world any better because you went to this high school? Does your light lead our people to glory? Even though I was 15 years old when I read those words, I understood this was an important message for my life. And I kept this book, and many times I have read this message. All of you are familiar with the owl's message. Probably we heard it in a different way in our own schools. We heard that one of the main purposes of Jesuit education is to prepare hombres y mujeres para los demás. A few years ago, Father Kolvenbach, the general of the Jesuits at the time, spoke at a Jesuit university. And he made this statement: the real measure of our schools is in what our students become. And so I ask us, what are our students becoming? How successful are our schools in forming men and women for others? The truth is, and please pardon me for saying, I speak to my own family. The truth is, most of our schools have no systematic understanding of who our schools are becoming. For sure, if we ask the rector, he will tell us many encouraging and true stories about so many graduates who are loving and good to their families. And this is the most important thing, to love my own spouse and to love my own children and to love my own elderly parents. And the rector will also tell us many encouraging and true stories about many graduates who are serving their communities in other ways, as volunteers, with money, in other kinds of ways. But here is the question: how many? Is that 5% of the graduates? Is it 20%? Is it 90%? We have no idea. Let me make this comparison. My Jesuit high school in the United States, we know exactly what percent of the graduates gave money to the school last year. We have no idea what percent of the graduates are men and women for others. You will tell me, this is very difficult to measure. How can we know? But I say this, of course it is difficult. But if we do not try to hold ourselves accountable to our highest aspiration above all, how can we determine whether we are successful in our mission? How can we run a business if we do not even know we are successful? Maybe it would be interesting to mail a letter to all of our alumni and just to ask them, we're trying to understand how good a job we did at forming men and women for others. Please tell us your thoughts. You are 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old? What should a man or woman for others who is 50, what should their life be like in their family life, in their community? What should they be doing? Please tell us some stories about your own life. If you have some definition or ideas for what a man or woman for others could be, please tell us. It would be helpful. This is my way of putting into words Father General's image of Uriah leadership. In other words, somebody who cares about more than himself, more than herself. Often I tell leadership groups the story of the space agency of the United States in the 1960s. You know that Russia and the United States were racing to put a rocket to the moon first. And President Kennedy made a visit to the space agency, and at one moment, he met a janitor who was cleaning an office. And to be polite, he said to the man, "So what is your job here?" And the man said to him, "Mr. President, I am putting a man on the moon." Okay, so everybody here knows that the teams that perform best, whether it's my JP Morgan, my old JP Morgan, Colegio San Ignacio, the Jesuits, the teams that perform best are teams where people, if I can use some American slang, get over themselves, appreciate this is not all about you. It's not all about being the rector, being the math teacher, being the librarian, being the accountant. Any team wins, including our network, any of our schools. A team wins when each person is willing to accept, I am part of something bigger than myself. And I will invest some of my energy, some of my ego, some of my imagination in this cause that is bigger than me. This is Uriah-style leadership. It's bigger than me. Now, if we can all activate our network to live Uriah-style leadership around the world, how would we get started? How would we start? And now I tell my third story, which goes to the Pope. So I am preparing a book on the new Pope, and I was privileged to speak with some of the Argentine Jesuits who were seminarians under Father Bergoglio. And by the way, I'd like to thank Carlos Gianicolo and the Antiguos Alumnos in Argentina for helping me with this project. And one of these Jesuits told me that Father Bergoglio used to tell them, okay, there are things to do. We are not Jesuits to sit here polishing our nails. And at one moment, the bishop of a district asked Father Bergoglio to take charge of a new parish near the Jesuit seminary, the Colegio Maximo. And he asked the seminarians to volunteer to help with this new parish. So what do? He makes on a piece of paper a little map, and he divides it in districts. And he tells the seminarians, you go here, you go here, you go here. And do what? Just go. The Jesuit told me this is what he remembers Father Bergoglio saying. Meternos en el barrio y caminarlo. No penar ovejas, sino la de salir al encuentro de todas ellas. Visitar a los más pobres y atender sus necesidades. In other words, just walk the barrio. Meet everyone. Pay attention to the poorest. Take care of their needs if you are able. And when they came back, Father Bergoglio used to look at their shoes. And if they had clean shoes, he knew they did nothing. If they had dusty shoes, he knew they had worked. And so we have another leadership concept, dusty feet leadership, a Jesuit style of leadership. So they went and they walked around the neighborhood. And one of the things they discovered is that people were hungry. And Father Bergoglio says, no podemos quedarnos de brazos cruzados ante el hambre de la gente, mientras que a nosotros no nos falta nada. We can't sit around here with our arms crossed when there are people hungry.